Everyone. Today on Niche Conversations, we are talking about the intersection of art history and gender history. And specifically, we're looking at masculinity related to Arctic exploration. And Eve is already here, so I'm going to invite her in. There we
Hello,
go.
is this working?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
This is Niche Conversations, and I'm Jessica DeWitt, one of the editors here at the network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I'm joined by Eve Bradley. Do you want to tell us more about yourself?
Hi, my name is Eve Bradley. I'm an art history undergraduate student at University of Toronto, and I'm so excited to be doing this today.
Yeah. So back in, what was it, October, I believe, you published a piece in our Visual Cultures of the Circumpolar North series, which is edited by Isabel Gap and Mark Cheatham. And this piece was called Romantic Failures in Arctic Exploration, Narratives of Conquest and Masculinity, which is a very good title, by the way.
Thank you.
And it's been very popular with our readers, so I think the title drew a lot of people in, and the content even more so, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, I wanted to talk about the art. So in this piece, you focus on artwork related to Admiral Sir George Bach and the expedition of the HMS Terror, which took place in 1836 through 37. So can you describe the public-facing art that came out of this expedition a little bit?
A lot of the public-facing art is it's very large scale and very romantic. It has a lot of elements of the sublime because, they're depicting the Arctic, which is
Yeah.
so kind of foreign to the British public back at home. So they really wanted to promote this narrative of it being like this beautiful but scary place that they were conquering and taking over and kind of furthering the British Empire.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so a lot of the public facing art is it's very romantic in style, partially because Romanticism is a movement often tied to cultural pride and
Mhm.
nationalism. So again, like furthering that narrative of kind of conquest and power and a lot of masculine domination over the landscape.
hmm Yeah, and it reminded me a lot of some of the similar artwork coming out of the American West at the time, which shows like huge mountains, and it always
Yeah.
has like the features of the landscape are huge, and then the figures are very small, right? To kind of give that idea of we're going into a place that is a bit hostile to us, but beautiful, and we're gonna take it over. So, and there's examples of it in the piece, which I'll post to our stories after this. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So we have these pieces of art that are depicting these huge glaciers and etc. So what was the purpose of this art? Like, what was the message that was being communicated to the public?
I feel like there were two kind of main messages. One of them was especially with George Bach's work, and the title of the painting. It's so long, but it's HMS Terror anchored near a cathedral-like iceberg in the waters surrounding Baffin Island. But
Mm-hmm.
that cathedral-like iceberg is kind of a really important takeaway because they're kind of trying to liken it to something that's familiar to the British public back home. So,
Mm-hmm.
A, they can understand kind of just the sheer scale because,
Yeah.
Gothic cathedrals, they're so massive and impressive and also invoke a similar kind of feeling of the sublime where it's so beautiful, but it's cold stone. It still
Mm-hmm.
feels a little bit hostile as well. And so part of it is just to kind of make it make sense and give the public back home something to kind of grasp onto to be like, oh, okay, I know what that is. Like, I know what
Yeah.
that's like. And another facet of it is to kind of, Bach uses it to kind of insert himself into a wider narrative of,
Mm-hmm.
British culture and history. Because, the Gothic movement is one of the most significant movements in architecture in England and in Catholicism generally. So to kind of compare your work and your expedition to this kind of grandiose, hugely important cultural facet he's inserting himself into part of this narrative and showing the importance of his work. And yeah, also the message back home, like I said before, was supposed to be a lot of like, look at this beautiful but hostile and terrifying land that we're,
Mm-hmm.
taking control of and using it to further British interests in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is such a key point in that a lot of the art that comes out of this period that's created in North America has an audience of Europeans in mind. So they're kind of trying to present North America in like a digestible way for British people or for other Europeans. So I think that's a really key point that this post is really bringing forward. Um, yeah, and just this idea that we have to think about these paintings in that kind of context. Like they're always created with a specific audience in mind.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, and you kind of juxtapose that in your paper with some of the artwork that wasn't created for public facing viewing. And that's kind of where I think a lot of the masculinity comes forth, right, in your
Yes,
argument.
yeah.
So to to kind of wrap up or the concluding question, let's talk about masculinity and what does this artwork tell us about 19th century masculinity, and what is the difference between representations of masculinity that come from the public and private pieces.
Yeah, I think even now there's still kind of this image like, before I wrote this paper, when I was thinking of, Arctic explorers, I'm thinking of like burly men in their little fisherman cap, like, huddled around a glass of whiskey kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I certainly was not picturing them displaying dried flowers in their cabins and doilies on their pianos. And,
Mm-hmm.
seeing as there were no women on board, they had to take on all of those like traditionally feminine domestic duties, like, doing the laundry, cooking, cleaning. So that's why I thought it was so interesting to look at Stanley's watercolors and sketches that weren't meant for public consumption
Mm-hmm.
and likely haven't been edited at all since the actual expedition, to see like really what was going on and to see like kind of the juxtaposition between these huge scale, like beautiful but altered images of the
Yes.
landscape versus, these honestly quite feminine appearing sketches of domestic life and of, you
Mm-hmm.
know, a lot of the crew, they built kind of community through the distribution of domestic labor. So there was it turned out that cooking and cleaning ended up being a bonding experience for the crew, which isn't really what you'd expect from like an Arctic expedition. So yeah, a lot of the masculinity element does come in through comparing it to the onboard sources, like or the
Mm-hmm.
sketches and everything. Um, Especially too because I feel like looking at the larger scale romantic paintings, you absolutely get like the notion of sublime and romanticism, but I don't think they themselves explicitly appear that masculine until they're compared to the reality, and then you realize kind of the gender difference
Yeah.
in their depiction.
Oh, that's a good point. Um, yeah, it's making me think of just how powerful these paintings actually were, because to this day, if we think of it in our imagination, if we're thinking back to 19th century Arctic exploration, we're going to think of these images that are like the ones that are the public facing artwork from that time. Like that image of Arctic exploration continues to this day, right? So it was successful in
Yeah, it
its
worked really
propaganda, I
well.
think. And yeah, just thinking of, I think we can take this to a lot of different spheres where men are in groups together, and living together, and the way that outwardly we think of them versus what happens internally, and like the relationships that have to form. And you don't get that from these rugged individual paintings it's me against the landscape. Really it's like a group of like deeply connected people
Yeah,
who
for
are
sure.
barely surviving
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
landscape.
especially in the whole failure of it all, in
Yes.
Bax's expedition.
Yes.
Um, and especially at points when they were, like stranded on the ice, they
Mhm.
weren't, I mean, their ship was trapped. They weren't moving forward. They weren't achieving any of the goals that they set out to. So really what they were doing is like playing house on the ice because it's all they
Yeah.
could do. So they spent a good month just hanging out in their shelter, cooking, cleaning,
Yeah. Yeah.
vibing out. And like that's not really the narrative that Back wants us to understand from his account of what happened because it doesn't paint him or his mission in the most successful light.
No. No, it does not. And it doesn't support the public supporting further missions, right? Like
Exactly.
this is part of a continued uh, effort to colonize the North, right? And to like mark the presence of the British people, or and you if you present it as a failure where men are just hanging out and um, trying to survive and cooking and making relationship with each other, then that's, there's no reason to give money to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. In the end,
um,
it's all about money, like everything
yeah.
else.
Yes. Ooh, yeah, money and lands. Money and
Hmm.
lands. Okay, well, this is like a really cool example, and I really appreciated this paper. And it's a really, I think as our conversation is showing, it's a very a specific example that illuminates like really big trends in art history, in colonial history, etc. So, thank you for coming on today to chat about it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been
Yeah,
so fun.
cool. Okay, take care, Eve.
Okay, bye.
Bye.